Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Pariyagak. We're really pleased to see you all here tonight. I understand. For those of you who don't know, I'll just give a brief introduction for Professor Armen MASROOBIAN, who's a professor of philosophy. Actually, it's not that he started out in Armenian studies, but he's sort of been working very hard in that field and making immense contributions to it. So he's the chair of philosophy at Southern Connecticut State University, and also the editor of the journal Metaphilosophy. And he publishes in American Philosophy, Aesthetics, Moral Philosophy, and Genocide Studies, and has co-edited 7 books. And so what I like about what he's going to be doing tonight is talking about his own work in a larger context. So he'll be talking about the memory studies that have been going on now in Turkey for, a decade or so. And both by Turkish scholars and by Armenian scholars and others. So it's a great thing. So often we have a very narrow focus on one person's work, but Armen tonight will be telling us about his own work in the context of what else is going on in the field. So Armen, I'll turn over to you now, and thank you very much again for coming.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan Patty, and also the arrangements for today's times. And I was thinking back, it was actually 4 years ago that I last spoke in 2015, when the Armenian Institute and the Wiener Library for Holocaust and Genocide Studies had an exhibition based on the Dildilian archive of photography. And I was speaking at the opening, and then I gave another talk in conjunction with that exhibition. And when I think back to that period in 2015, it was in the fall of 2015, I actually had 3 exhibitions going on simultaneously. I had an exhibition here at the Wiener Library, I had an exhibition in Ankara, and I had an exhibition in Yerevan. It was quite a busy year, and for Armenians, 2015 was a busy year given the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide, and everybody wanted to do everything in that year. So it was a lot of air miles in that time. Now, I'm going to tell you a few things by way of a preliminary, and this has to do with the title. If you see, the title of my talk is Presencing and Absence, Accountability and Memory in the Aftermath of the Armenian Genocide. Presencing is not a commonly used word. It's actually a noun. It's rare. It means the action or process of summoning up the presence of something, the action of making present. And this is what I've been engaged in for about 10 years. Making present what was lost, what was denied, what was destroyed, what was forgotten with regard to Armenian culture and heritage. I'll give you a little outline. I'm not going to deal in depth with all of these topics, but I'll touch on them as we go along. I'll give you a little theoretical background as a philosopher, someone who works in genocide studies. I also like to mention, when I give talks to a non-Armenian audience, I always say that I'm a child of genocide survivors. Both my mother and father were alive in Turkey in 1915, but among Armenians, that's probably true for most of you, maybe not your parents, but your grandparents or your great-grandparents. But I also have approached this topic as a scholar, especially in the last 10 or 12 years, in a field we call memory studies. And it brings together my work in moral philosophy and also my work in aesthetics, I deal with photography, I deal with the arts, bringing these together to make present the culture, the heritage that was lost. And I do this because I see a connection between human rights and culture and heritage, and the fact that the idea of genocide in our thinking is often tied with death, biological death, but there's also cultural death. There's the heritage that's destroyed. And I'll say a few more things about that as we go along. I will briefly talk about the historical background of the suppression of the memory of the Armenian genocide and its denial. Then I will look at over a decade of progress and unfortunately many reversals with regard to memory work and the Armenian genocide, and in particular, I'm talking about what's going on in Turkey. And if we have time, I will say a few things toward the end about problems that are faced here, faced with people who do this work in Turkey. I keep jumping ahead too much. So anyone who works in genocide studies knows that Raphael Lemkin, who was a Polish Jewish jurist, came up with the concept of genocide, and he coined the term. This was in the 1940s, but he was already talking and thinking about genocide many years before, and it was in reaction to the Armenian genocide. And in the early 1930s, he came up with the concept, though he didn't have the name, and he referred to two aspects of this destruction of a people. One was the what he called barbarism, which was the killing of individuals. But the other important component was what he called vandalism, which is attacking the culture and the identity of the people. And you can actually destroy a people, an ethnic group, without necessarily killing a lot of individuals if you destroy the collectivity, what brings the cultural identity together. And that's why I quote here Lemkin in 1933, an attack targeting a collectivity can also take the form of systematic and organized destruction of the art and cultural heritage in which the unique genius and achievement of a collectivity are revealed in fields of science, art, and literature. So genocide is a crime against a group, a collectivity. And sometimes it's in a way more efficient to destroy what makes the group. It's an attack against the group, not necessarily an attack against the individual. So you could destroy the culture and no longer have Tibetans, as what's going on today in China, where the culture is being destroyed in an attempt to make Tibetans and the Uyghurs into Chinese. So this is in part behind my work for the last 10 years, because it's a way of resisting this destruction, resisting the destruction of the culture and the cultural heritage. And Lemkin, who developed the concept of genocide, labeled crimes such as this as vandalism. Such destruction has come to be known as cultural genocide. So this is how I link my work and genocide studies together. And I make the argument, and I won't do it here when I present it more at the conferences that deal with genocide and reparations. I make the argument that we can't just look at the biological death of individuals. We have to look at how the culture is destroyed. And when we think of what happened in the United States, in North America, in Canada, and the United States, to Native Americans, how the government was attempting, and very successfully in many cases, to get the, as they say, get the native out of the person, get the culture out of the person by putting them through these residential boarding schools. That kind of activity is, again, a form of genocide. And when one thinks about reparations, how do you repair this damage? This is where I think my work comes in, is bringing back and using the culture to reestablish and to resist the kind of destruction that goes on in genocide. And when we think of the Armenian case, we all realize that denial is so central to what had happened to the Armenians. But in 1919, the denial, even though there was denial at the time of the genocide in 1915, because it was called relocation. But by the end of the war and the defeat of the Ottomans, Armenians began to, in Istanbul, to commemorate the genocide, and this was the first genocide memorial created in Istanbul in 1919 in what is today Gezi Park. It was in what was the Armenian cemetery there. It was taken down and destroyed. No one knows what happened to it in 1920, 1922. So what might have begun in 1919 came to an end in terms of within Turkey, the Republic of Turkey, in remembering and recognizing what had happened to the Armenians. And it wasn't until 2000 and the new millennium that these issues started to begin to be discussed again. What you did find in Turkey are if we look at Robert Bevitt, I have another quote. This is from a book, maybe you're familiar. He's the architectural critic for the Evening Standard, and he's a writer, journalist, scholar. He's written about destroying buildings, and his work has been about that kind of cultural destruction. And he writes about the Armenians, he writes about Bosnia, he writes about the Holocaust. And he says, if the touchstones of identity are no longer there to be touched, and he's talking sort of physically here, memories fragment and dislocate. Their hostile destruction is an amnesia forced upon the group as a group and on its individual constituents. Out of sight can become literally out of mind for those whose patrimony has been destroyed and for the destroyers. And this is what has gone on in Turkey. The destroyers, that society is in many respects unaware, at least when I first started working in Turkey, I would encounter many people who had no idea about their own history. And this was in sort of the rewriting of Turkish history. Armenians have resisted for many years holding on to that patrimony. And what I've attempted to do in my work in Turkey is to bring that patrimony back. Because what you find in Turkey are things like this. This is a genocide memorial in Turkey, but it's a genocide memorial not for the Armenians, but this is to commemorate the Turks who were slaughtered by Armenians in 1918. And you find some of these monuments. And I'm not denying that there was violence against the Turks by Armenians in this period. But this is part of the attempt to rewrite the history of Turkey, omitting the minorities, including not just the Armenians, but the Syrians and the Greeks. So I want to talk about a decade of progress and reversals. When I talk about the decade, I'm thinking about the turn of the millennium. It was only after 2000 and about 2005 where the whole issue of the Armenians, what had happened to the Armenians, started to be discussed somewhat openly in academia in Turkey. And it was in 2005 where there was a first attempt to have an academic conference, first at Boğaziçi University, and it was stopped there. Eventually, in September 2005, they had the conference in Bilgi University, and there was a lot of controversy over it. The nationalists were quite up in arms, but it was 2005, 6, and the work of Hrant Dink that began the process of a discussion of the Armenian issue in Turkey. Unfortunately, with his death in 2007, his assassination, his voice was silent, but it gave courage to a lot of people to speak up in Turkey about the Armenian issue and what had happened to the Armenians. And this is just a photo of, some say 600, 800,000 people came to his funeral in Istanbul carrying signs, "We are Hrant, we are Armenians." And this began the whole period in which Turkey was trying to move toward membership in the EU. The EU was very active in supporting programs in Turkey to deal with issues of minority and human rights. And the different NGOs were established, including the Hrant Dink Foundation and Anadolu Kültür, which is the organization I've worked with for a dozen years. First, by developing exchange programs between the Republic of Turkey and the Republic of Armenia, and various publications that came out in this period, workshops, conferences. I began my work in Turkey about this time, and it was very, very exciting time. It was a very exciting time to be there and to just be so surprised, having grown up with a certain kind of perspective on Turkey and seeing so many like-minded, courageous individuals who were willing to deal with their past in ways that I would not have thought possible a mere 20, 30 years ago. My work began around 2009, and I started working with Anadolu Kültür, an NGO founded by Osman Kavala. And as many of you know, I mentioned I had a number of exhibitions there, but I wasn't the first. There were other exhibitions, important work that began. So I can't say mine was groundbreaking. Mine sort of pushed the envelope a little further, but in 2011, we have this important exhibition, Horovel. This was developed by a Turkish photographer who went on both sides of the border and took photographs of the Armenians and Turks. And the Horovel, I don't know if you know anyone know what that is? It's a song. It's a peasant song in preparation for the harvest and work. The song is sung by Turks and by Armenians, obviously using different words, but this song is there on the landscape. And that's what this exhibition was about. People showing photographs of their parents who were on the other side of the border. And there were a number of videos in this exhibition. Then some of you might know Antoine Agudjan. He's a very important photographer. I think did he speak here once or haven't?
Erhan spoke here once.
Erhan, okay.
But Anton,
No, and he he did this exhibition again in Depo, which is the cultural gallery space in Istanbul that Anadolu Culture organizes its events in. It's called Burning Eyes, the Armenians' Memories. He went around the world and he took photographs of Armenians in the diaspora, and in many occasions the Armenians commemorating April 24th. So they're photographs, as you see here, of Armenians at various points taken around the world. So this is a way, again, this was in a sense, again, pushing the envelope, groundbreaking in the sense that here are photographs of Armenians commemorating the Armenian genocide. And it was about this time that the first commemorations of the Armenian genocide within Turkey in Istanbul began in Taksim. I was there, I think, for the third or fourth commemoration of the genocide there. Whoops. I can't go through all the exhibitions. Obviously, there are many that have happened. I'm just going through a few that were in around the time where I began. This was an exhibition called Never Again: Apology and Coming to Terms with the Past. And this was looking at different cultures in which apologies were made, beginning with Willy Brandt in Germany, and different cultures where there were somewhat official or semi-official government apologies, and these are photographs of those events and the kinds of things that happened around them. Of course, what was absent in that exhibition was the Turkish government acknowledging the Armenian genocide. So in its absence, it was present in this exhibition. So let me move to my work, and I sort of divide it up into three components: the exhibitions, which I mentioned, my publications, talks, interview, documentaries, and then finally the sites of memory, of elements that I try, along with the people I work with. I use the I, but I should always use the we. This is not me. I can't do any of this on my own without some great individuals who are a photographer. So let me just mention the sources that I use for my memory work. There are about glass negatives of the Dildilian archive from 1888 to 1922. 1922, November 1922, was when the family left Turkey and moved to Greece. And then subsequent to that, they were photographers in Greece and also in the United States. And there are thousands more photographs that I've inherited from the family. There are also extensive written memoirs of two generations of the family, and there are also multiple genders. So there's perspective from women in the family and also from the males in the family. There are many letters and documents that I've been given, including Ottoman documents, Ottoman deed to property that we have outside of Marzavan, various family artifacts, including copperware and a violin, which I've used in multiple exhibitions that was part of the family story. And then the last component is what I gathered through my own research and travels. So my grandfather, Tsolak Dildilian, he was the founder of the family photography business, born in Yozgat, but the family finds its roots in Sepastia, in Sivas. And this is just a photo of one of the studios. This was in Samsun, and they have this in English because the British and the Americans were in Samsun at this period of time. This is a photo at the end of the First World War. This is a photo of my grandfather, probably around late 1920s. But this is him, beardless, when he began his photography business. And I'm going to just show a few of these images because if you want to see more of them. They're all in that photography book. I'm just sort of giving you a quick overview of the resources. And as you can see on the back of the photo card, in 3 languages, the commercial language of French, in Armenian, and in Ottoman Turkish. This was quite typical of that period in the 1880s. And these are examples of very early photographs. This is the first photograph taken in 1888 of my great uncle Armen, Solog's younger brother. And these are photos of my great-grandfather, who was had a leather and shoe business in Sivas. And I always like to joke, in the family memoir it says that my great-grandfather hated one of these 2 photographs. You know which one that would be? This one. The businessman didn't like this. This is what he wanted to be remembered as when he dealt with the Turkish notables in Sivas. This is his brother, Armen, who eventually came to the United States, studied photography in Illinois, and went back to Turkey and joined his brother, and they became the Dildilian brothers photographers. He had an injury as a child, and he was amputated, but that didn't slow him down. He had a full career, a full life as a photographer, both in Turkey, in Greece, and then in San Francisco, where he died. This is him on his horse. Or is it a mule? Photographers traveled they had studios, but they were in the interior of Anatolia. They would travel from village to town, and his camera equipment is here on the back of his horse. This is Marsovan, which is the where the family, my grandfather moved in about 1892 and set up a studio. Those are the Armenian schools and church at the top of the hill. And Marsovan had Anatolia College, famous American missionary college, where there was a lot of business taking photographs of students and activities. And all these white buildings you see are part of the college, including the family home with the glass roof studio there. I've identified many of these buildings, and this is the hospital building that was part of Anatolia College. As you see, we made a little film of this because it's a panorama, and the Dildilians were noted for the most incredible panoramic photographs. There's one I have that's 360 degrees. My grandfather went to the roof of this building and took 12 shots and put them together into one 360-degree panorama. This is taken off the panorama, the 360-degree panorama. It shows the family house with the glass roof, north-facing. Studio's best light is north, so this is a glass roof and glass here, and my grandmother's laundry hanging in the window, which he would not have seen. Because this is the high-resolution photo, and it's enlarged in the panorama I have. You can't see it, the details, until you scan it and then enlarge it. So let me go through some of the exhibitions and my experience with them. Working with Ana de la Culture and Depot, first exhibition was in April 2013 in Istanbul, and we had a symposium to begin the exhibition. Salpi Gazarian, who's now at UC University of Southern California, was with CivilNet. She was the moderator, and Arsene Kanjan and Aysegul Altınay, 2 very activist individuals, were part of the panel we had. Then this is just some images from the exhibition. As you can see, the scale of the photographs, given the resolution, we're able to make them 4 or 5 feet tall. We had the narrative of the family in Turkish that told the whole story up until their being forced out in 1922. And you can see many of the images here. And there's a whole section on the post-war and the orphans, because the family established orphanages, both helped establish one in Marzavan and one in Samsun. And we had a few examples of original photographs, but mostly the postcards based on Dildilian photographs. We had some of the glass negatives that I brought back to Turkey after they left Turkey 100 years ago almost. Had them nicely packed on my carry-on. And we had groups of Armenian students from the Armenian high schools in Istanbul visiting the exhibition and taking tours. And this is a little video. I wasn't responsible for this, but it gives you an idea of the exhibition. So we had a number of videos in the exhibition. I'll just move on because I could spend ages, but we had a separate memorial room where we had the photos of individuals who did not survive the genocide, including members of the family and professors and students related to the college. Whose daughter is sitting in the back row, Ara Dildilian, and he is talking about his experiences as a child in Marzavan. And this was an audio recording, which we then used the photographs to illustrate.
50 miles south from Samsun on the Black Sea. It was a college town, and Anatolia College was very close to our house. In fact, our house was a part of the campus. Marzavan was a very old city, and with a very large Armenian colony, not a colony, but settlement. The old part of the city, the citadel, was the Armenian church, and Armenian sections all around it. There was a very small Greek population there. It was a new settlement. Of course, Greeks were living in that neighborhood also for centuries, because that's considered a part of Pontus. It was quite an intellectual community. Armenians had very good schools, and Anatolia College was established there, which became a source of inspiration probably, or enlightenment. And there was the American hospital there, a very massive stone building. Really, it was a good college community atmosphere, concerts, lectures, museum. I know I was a small child then, but our neighbor, Dr. Manisajian, who was quite a scientist, he was the curator of the museum. Perhaps I acquired my interest in minerals and rocks and antiques and you name it from him.
I'm going to just skip ahead and see if I can find a spot. This had some moments.
Here. And just over there, they had a baby boy.
He's describing the deportations.
I was asked to take care of the baby boy, and of course they were waiting for the Volkswagens to come and to pick them up. And then the word came that they were there.
that video, when we were showing at the exhibition, we had a separate room set up for it, and there was incredible emotional reaction to it from people who attended, Turks, Armenians, Americans.
The only photographer
And we had then another video, this is of my mother, who also tells her more beautiful memories of her childhood, because she was only 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, so she didn't.
Didn't go to Axel.
They weren't deported.
No. And whoever was there, all my relatives, some of my aunts and so on, uncles, he kept them. He could keep all the relatives they did in Marfa, whoever was. But the others that were in Samson or Sepatia or Harper, they all were deported and were killed, most of them. Nearly all of them.
When she says nearly all of them, only 2 other members of the family survived outside of Marwan. And if some of you might already know the story, the family was allowed to convert to Islam and take Turkish identity because my grandfather was needed by the Ottoman army as a photographer. So he worked in the army taking photographs for the government at that period of time. The only 2 members of the family who were not in Marwan that survived were 2 of my grandmother's nieces, one of whose son is sitting here in the back row. That was Nelly. We had then an exhibition, and this was the most difficult exhibition in Marwan itself, because this is a more conservative part of Turkey. I don't know if people know the geopolitics of Anatolia. The area along the Black Sea has some of the more vehement nationalist ideology. The area which was the Pontus, where the Greeks were removed, some of the more extreme Grey Wolf areas are this area. But Marwan has a bit more liberal perspective, but we had to self-censor the exhibition here and not use the term soykırım, which is genocide in Turkish. And we used a tashan. It was an old inn and merchant quarter for the caravans at one time. And we had to redo the whole exhibition because it's a historic building, and we did these panels. But we kept most of the story intact. And we also reached out to the high schools. These are students that I met on an earlier trip that came to the exhibition. We made one mistake in the text where we didn't omit the word soykırım, and we discovered this the night before the exhibition. And we were at a quandary what to do, but fortunately the texts that dealt with 1915 were all black with white lettering, so we put a piece of black tape over the word soykırım, genocide, which then actually drew more attention to the panel. So in its absence, it was more present, I like to say. This exhibition, we got local support from the Chamber of Commerce, surprisingly, and it was well received, but it was also controversial, and there was some negative publicity about it in some of the local press. We moved on to Diyarbakir in 2014, and we did this at the Giragos Church, and this was soon after the church had been completely restored, and we had this exhibition at the first Easter commemoration, Badarak, in this church. The same day we opened it that afternoon at the church. And in this exhibition, this is the church. Has anyone been to Giragos? Yeah, it's the biggest, one of the biggest churches in the Middle East. We had the exhibition in the portico and a couple of the exterior rooms. But unfortunately, this is what the church looks like now. It's sort of in no man's land because of the Turkish and Kurdish conflict. And the final exhibition was in Ankara in 2015, and this was unique in the sense that we were able to use a municipal art gallery run by the local mayor's office in the district of Ankara that the CHP, the party not of Erdogan, ran. And this was this in Diyarbakir and in Ankara we used Armenian text for the first time. In Diyarbakir we used Kurdish, Armenian, and Turkish. In Ankara we used Armenian and Turkish. It was a beautiful gallery space. Again, we used the black for 1915. And this caused a real scandal. And there was a lot of backlash from nationalists about this exhibition, but not directed per se at me, but at the municipality for sponsoring this. And the mayor had to issue a statement saying we don't endorse the content of the exhibition, but we believe that different viewpoints should be exhibited here. 2015, things were already going bad in Turkey with Erdogan continuing to grab power. These are some of there was a lot of writing about the work I did in Turkey, what Anadolu Culture did in Turkey, these NGOs, and these exhibitions. Unfortunately, today Zaman doesn't exist anymore. It was closed down. People were arrested. The Daily News, the Hurriyat, is still there. These two publications don't exist anymore. Journalism is under extreme threat. Pretty much it's either owned by Erdogan and his allies, or there are very few internal outlets where you can get any objective news these days. And this is here, the Wiener Library. I just threw this in. This was in London. And then the last exhibition we had last year, and visibility. We use artifacts here. These are family copperware. These are family drawings. They're family silverware. They're various audio recordings that we created. These are, again, many of the photographs, but these continue past 1922 into the 30s, into the 40s, giving a full panorama of not just the Ottoman Armenian story, but the Armenian story in the diaspora. Again, we used backlit glass negatives. I'm going to really sort of skip this part. I gave a talk here on the story of a photograph. This is a photograph taken at the beginning of the First World War when the gendarmes arrived in Marzavan. As you can see, these little children are looking at their arrival, and the soldiers are looking at the camera. And this was the beginning of the persecution of the Armenians in Marzavan. And I told this story here. It was like in December of 4 years ago, about this unique photograph taken in January 1916 of the members of the family celebrating Armenian Christmas, because it says Isus Zanav 1916, when they were all supposed to be Islamized and Turkified, and they're doing this in secret. And 4 of these young men have escaped the deportation route. And I've written about this and published about it. Besides, in my book, there's a proto-Armenian flag there. 1915, about the same time that photograph was taken. This is my mother in Mars. And this piece was, my research was translated to Turkish and published there. It's also been translated in Arabic, telling the story. of that photograph and Armenian survival. And of course, this is the book that tells the whole family story. And in July of this year, after a long wait, this book that you have here, Fragments of a Lost Homeland, is being published in Turkish. And it's going to appear, that one, in July, and there'll be a small exhibition in Istanbul. Cross my fingers. We published this 3 years ago. There's a photography book in bilingual that has many of the photographs in the other book, but there are more photographs in the one there, this one. And again, these books have all been reviewed in Turkish publications. And I want to show this short clip from a film we made. When we had the first exhibition in 2013, my cousins came to Turkey for the first time, some of them. Some of them had been there before, and we took a family pilgrimage to Marzivan. And Osman Kavala had arranged for the shoot video of the whole trip, and we had about 25 hours of video that sat unused. And for the Glendale exhibition, some Turkish friends in Istanbul and in New York edited it down to a 45-minute film called A Journey Home. And these are my cousins. This is the family home. It still exists, and the family that moved in after us is still there. So there have been 2 families since then. And I'll skip. This is the
Bu ev bizim geldi. Tabii siz ise biz de buyurun misafirimiz olun. Bakın evinize.
Böyle bir şey tahmin edebiliyor muyuz? Yani günün birinde bir adamın çıkıp buraya gelebileceğini, örneğin bizim evimizde.
So this is the current owner talking about the first time I visited. And they were in the population exchange. They had to leave their home outside of Thessaloniki and move to Turkey. So they were not there during the genocide.
And they're Greek.
So what?
They're Greek.
They're Turks, but they were living in the Ottoman Empire, and that part was currently in Greece. This is what the house looks like. You can see where the glass was. These are some old images. This is the neighborhood. This is the sites of memory. I'm going to skip through this. I was working with the local people to try to identify the Armenian sites and homes. Many of them we identified, but a lot of this work has come to a stop. Many of these individuals have either fled or are reluctant to move ahead with some of the work. These are pictures of the college. And this is the hospital that I was talking about, which is now a high school. This is the director of the high school, and many of the old photographs are hanging on the walls of that high school. And this is an important monastery that was outside of Marzivan, where the Armenians were taken in the deportation before separating out the men from the women and children. And it's now part of a farm. Catherine Massoud is a filmmaker. He's done a number of documentaries, has a quite good experience at creating some very moving pieces. And who knows what will come of it, but we're going to try to create a film. The students were given 2 images to choose from, and they were given 2 weeks to do something with the 2 images. So I spent a day with them telling the family story, gave them the books to read, and they took the images, and this is what they created. And you can see they've taken the photographs and they've given them some sort of motion and color. This is the Armenian Protestant church. President of Anatolia College. It's my great aunt. Playing the organ. That's my mother. They knew the individuals who didn't survive. Those are the ones that disappeared. So that was just 2 weeks with the photographs. They're going to have a semester working on the material, and we're going to shoot new footage. So I'm going to bring this to an end. I always dedicate my talks to Osman Kavala, who's been in jail since October 2017, charged with some ludicrous charges relating to the Gezi Park demonstrations. He's going to have his first court appearance on June 24th of this month. And he's not the only one in this situation in Turkey.